Okay, this video is going to take us through the allowance calculator program that we just wrote, and the reason why we're looking at this is because after looking at some of the submissions, I noticed a number of things that students did that were very typical of beginning programmers, and so we want to try to deal with those issues, and also note that the things I'm bringing up are things that are involved or covered by the textbook, and so the author does address these things because they are common, and so that's what we're going to be looking at. So the first thing I want to show you is probably the most efficient way to write this particular code, as we know how to code at this point. And so the key thing, the main issue, is that to show how that you do not have to add another variable to store the weekly allowance or the week allowance. So there is a variable already that's been declared and reserved that stores the current balance or the current allowance, and of course that would be the weekly allowance variable, current week allowance variable, and it's storing 14 according to line 15 as I am showing it here. And so we do not need to create another memory location that's going to store the updated week allowance, and I'm going to show you why. And so what you should be doing is you should actually be doing what I'm doing here, is write your memory locations with their names and keep track of their values, their contents, as we go through this. And so so make sure you have this down. So 14 is the current balance, and then we go on to where the user is asked to roll the dice and enter the score. So they do, and then this line of course reads that input, and then it stores it inside of this variable. And so let's just say that it's 11. Okay, then the compiler moves on down to the if-else structure. It's going to take the return value of roll amount, which we're saying is 11, we're just pretending here, and evaluating 11 is greater than or equal to 10 to be true or false. And of course, since that's true, the compiler is going to execute the if clause. And so the if clause says to add 10 to the current week allowance. So right here in this variable, the variable is updated from being 14 to now being 24. Alright, so that's one of the purposes of it being a variable. The root word being vary, it can change, and so it used to be 14, but now it's going to be 24 after this line of code is executed. Now notice that what's built into Java in the compiler making decisions, that if the if clause is executed, the else clause is going to be ignored. So we'll demonstrate that here. And so when it does go to this next line down here, the current week allowance is not going to be 14 any longer, but it will have the updated amount in it. So there's no need to write or to reserve another separate memory location to store that updated weekly allowance, unless there's some reason to go that you need that original amount. Then you would need to create another memory location, and we're going to show you that later in case that's something that you would need to do. So that's how this would work. Now let's show then, remove that, and let's go ahead and say that the roll amount was something like 6. Okay, so now if it's 6, is it going to still do the right thing? Well, when it comes to the Boolean expression, 6 is greater than or equal to 10 is evaluated to be false, and so that if clause is going to be ignored. And then the else clause will be executed, and it's going to add 3 to the current week allowance, so that 14 now becomes 17. So when it comes to that last line, it will give the accurate amount of 17 as being the new updated allowance. So it will do the right thing by using that same variable and just using that one variable to store the current balance as it goes, as it changes. Alright, so let's go down to the next line and show another common thing that students did. And what students did is that some of them did put that print statement inside of the if-else structure. Now the directions said to after the if-else structure to display the new balance, and so that's what I was looking for. So if you did this, if you printed the updated balance within the if-else structure, then and I know why that students had to, felt like they had to do that, but we do not have to do that. So what we're going to show here is that if you, as it says up here, if you repeat a line of code in all the clauses, then move that line of code to after the if-else structure. In other words, we want to make this more efficient. You're putting in code that is not necessary. You're writing more code than you need to, and which makes the code as a whole not as easy to read and edit. And so we don't want to do extra code. It's just, as a programmer, it's best to be most efficient, have the least amount of code in your programs as possible. And so basically, if you did this, and if we remove this line right here, and then take this guy and move him out after the if-else structure, so it's not here, then it's going to work. In fact, that's what we just demonstrated in the first example. That's what would happen. So it is not necessary to repeat a line of code within if-else structures. So that's one thing to try to eliminate in your programs as you go along. Okay, so let's move on to the next page, or the back side. And now let's say we do need to add another variable and use that variable inside the if-else structure. Here's something that we want to make sure to be careful of. If you introduce a new variable, a new named memory location for use inside of an if-else structure, the key thing is, as a general rule, don't let's see if I can do this right. Don't declare that variable within the if-else structure. And we're going to demonstrate why. So if you do need to add a new variable, or just as a general rule, typically you don't want to declare variables within an if-else structure. Now, there's times when it will be appropriate and it will be useful. There's other times when, if you don't know what you're doing, it's going to cause issues and cause error messages. And we're going to show then how this works, what happens. So let's say for this program you decide to declare another variable to store the updated weekly allowance, and so which a lot of you did, and what happened is that you made it work. Many of you, even though you did that, you made it work because what you did is you put a print statement inside of or right below that the declaration of that new variable, and that's why it worked, because you did a print statement in each clause. So let's say that we want to follow the thing where we do not repeat a line of code, especially a print statement, within an if-else structure. Let's say we want to follow that, so you can see out here we have that line of code after the if-else structure. So the problem is going to be when you declare that variable within the clauses. Here's what happens. When you declare this variable within this clause, what happens is it's declaring the variable within this block of code. So imagine that you have a computer memory that has a ton of cells in it, but there's going to be a certain group of cells that are going to be in, we're going to call it a room. And so in this room you have 4 walls, and you cannot see outside of it, and from the outside you can't see inside the room. And so this memory location, which I'll demonstrate here, is declared within this room. And so what happens is this particular memory location is only accessible within a certain portion of the computer memory. And so what happens is, then when you store that value, let's say it was started at 14 and then it went to 24 here, what happens is when you come down to this line of code, then when it calls for updated week allowance, it does the compiler from this vantage point cannot see inside this room. And so the variables that are declared within this block of code are unable to be seen from outside of that room. The only variables that this compiler can see from this vantage point are the variables that have been declared within the block of code that this variable call is made. And so, well, what block of code is updated week allowance variable call? What block of code is that within? And so what that is if you look at the entire program, that's going to be within the main method body. So it can see anything that's within the body of the main method. And so the compiler from this vantage point, from this variable call, can see current week allowance and can see roll num, but it can't see updated week allowance because it's hidden, it's in a room. And so that's why you don't want to declare your variable within an if-else structure, because you can only call it from within that room. And so just to demonstrate what happens is when you what students did to make this work, which was a good idea. I mean, that's what you had to do, so what you did was good. And so, but if you put this system.out.println inside, and somehow my code got mixed up, and I'm not sure why. I think I know why. So I better check this out. Okay, let's do it like this. So if we were to take this print statement and put it down here, now I kind of have to clean this up a little bit. Okay, so what's going to happen now is that now it's calling updated week allowance from within the same room, and so it can see this. And so that's why it worked for students that did declare those variables inside of the if-else structure, that you made it work because you called it from within the same room or in the same block of code. And so that's why it worked. So instead, what you want to do to eliminate those issues as a general rule, then what we want to do is what we do down here, and that would be declare that variable above the if-else structure. Now it doesn't have to be exactly here where I put it. I mean, you could put it down here if you wanted to, but you want to declare that updated week allowance prior to the if-else structure. And then down here inside the if clauses, you would not have that data type. You would just take that variable and say and assign it this particular calculation. Now, for some reason, I'm missing a line of code, and so I got to go back and check that. I think I must have done that earlier. Okay. Oh, there it is. All right. So I do have it. And so now when this is called here from updated weekly allowance or week allowance, when that's called, it is able to see it because it's been declared within the main method body, and that's what this variable call can see. Alright, so that's how that works. So be careful about where you declare those new variables. As a general rule, don't declare variables within the if-else structure.